Good morning, students. Today we will talk about History, Chapter 4 Tribes, Decos, and the Vision of a Golden Age. Now, firstly, we will understand that who were tribal people and who were Decos. Tribal people are known as indigenous or native people, are groups of people who have a unique cultural, historical, and social identity. They are often the original inhabitants of a region or area, and their communities have existed there for generations. Basically, a tribe is a group of people sharing common ancestry and culture and prefer to live by themselves in a closed society. Now, who were Dikus? The word Dikus means outsider. Dikus were the people who made the tribal people dependent upon them, thereby causing them a lot of misery and suffering. Examples of Dikus are traders, moneylenders, missionaries, Hindu landlords, and the Britishers. Now we will see that how did tribal groups live. The tribal people of India were involved in a variety of activities by the 19th century. Basically, tribal groups live in diverse ways depending on their specific culture, environment, and historical context. If we see common characteristics of how tribal groups often live was traditional lifestyle, strong community bonds, respect for nature, oral tradition, etc. It's important to remember that tribal communities are incredibly diverse and each group has its own unique way of life. As outsider, it's essential to approach and interact with tribal people with respect, sensitivity, and appreciation for their customs and beliefs. Now we will discuss about the tribal groups. Actually, what they did too. Some were jhum cultivators, some were hunters and gatherers and traders, and some herded animals. Who are the jhum cultivators? Jhum cultivators is a traditional shifting cultivation farming techniques of indigenous communities of Bengalis in the Chittagong Hill tracts in Bangladesh and nearby regions in Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram and Nagaland in India. In the month of January, the Jhumias cut down the forest on the slope of the hill. Basically, jhum cultivation is also known as slash and burn agriculture. Is a traditional farming practice used by some tribal communities in various parts of the world. It is especially prevalent in certain regions of northern India, Southeast Asia, and parts of Africa and South America. Now we will talk about some hunters and gatherers and traders. Hunters-gatherers were prehistorical nomadic groups that harnessed the use of fire, developed intricate knowledge of plant life, and refined technology for hunting and domestic purposes as they spread from Africa to Asia, Europe, and beyond. Tribal groups in many regions survived on hunting animals and gathering forest produce. Some Khundos were community who survived on collective hunts and divide the meat amongst themselves. The community ate fruits and roots and used oil extracted from the seeds of the sal and maua to cook food. Shrubs and herbs were used from forest for medical purposes. And the forest people exchanged goods with the thing they needed in the return for their valuable forest produce. When the forest produce shrank, tribal people had wandered out in search of work as laborers. Tribal groups were dependent on traders and moneylenders because they often needed money to buy and sell in order to be able to get the goods that were not produced within the locality. But the interest charged on the loans were very high. Now we will talk about some tribal group who used to herded animals. Herding and rearing was also an occupation for many tribal groups. They were pastoralists who moved with their herds of cattle or sheep according to the seasons. Now we will talk about settled cultivation. Some tribal groups took a settled cultivation, or you can say settled agriculture. Now, what is settled agriculture? Settled agriculture is when farmers farm on the same plot for many years. Basically, tribal groups, even before the 19th century, began settling down. The land for the Mundas and Chotangpur belonged to the clan as a whole. All members of the clan were regarded as descendants of the original settlers who had first cleared the land. British officials saw settled tribal groups as more civilized than hunters gatherers and shifting cultivators. Now we will discuss about how did colonial rule affect tribal lives during British rule. Colonial rule affected the tribal lives in the following ways. The tribal of chief lost many of their administrative powers and had to follow the rules which were formulated by the British. They also had to pay taxes to the British. They were exploited by traders and moneylenders. During British rule, now what happened to tribal chief? Before the British arrived, the tribal chief were important people. They enjoyed economic power and had the rights to administer and control their territories. But their functions and power changed under British rule. They lost their administrative powers and were forced to follow laws made by British officials in India. Now we will see that what happened to the shifting cultivators. Shifting cultivators was forced to leave their occupation under the colonial rule and to practice settled agriculture. As most of the land was occupied, they didn't get fertile soil to grow crops. Basically, the British wanted tribal groups to settle down as it was easier to control and administer settled peasants. The British introduced land settlements to get regular revenue sources for the state. Land settlement means the British measures the land, define the rights of each individual to that land, and fix the revenue demand for the state. The British effort to settle Jhum cultivators was not very successful. Facing widespread protest, the British had to ultimately allow them the right to carry on shifting cultivation in some parts of the forest. Now we will understand that how tribal lives were directly affected by the changes in forest laws and what was the impact. So, the tribal lives were directly affected by the changes in forest laws. Some forests were classified as reserved forests as they produced timber, which the British wanted. The British people stopped the tribal people from entering the forest, but they faced the problem of getting laborers. So the colonial officials came up with solution. And what was the solution? The colonial officials decided to give Jhum cultivators small patches of land in the forest and allows them to cultivate. In return, those who lived in the villages had to provide labor to the forest department. Many tribal groups disobeyed the new rules, continued with practices that were declared illegal, and at times rose in open rebellion. We will learn how tribal people searched for work. From the late 19th century, tea plantations started coming up and mining became an important industry. Tribals were recruited in large numbers to work at the tea plantation of Assam and the coal mines of Jharkhand. What was the closure look? The closure look was the tribal groups from different parts of the country rebelled against the changes in laws, the restrictions of their practices, the new taxes they had to pay, and the exploitation of traders and moneylenders. Now I will tell you the story of Birsa Munda. Who were Birsa Munda? Birsa Munda was a prominent tribal leader and folk hero who played a significant role in the Indian independence movement during the late 19th and early 20th century. Now let's start with the story. Birsa was born in the mid 1870s as an adolescent. He heard tales of the Munda upsings of the past and so the Siddhas. Who were Siddhas? They were leaders of the community, urging the people to revolt. In the local missionary school, he heard that it was possible for the Mundas to attain the kingdom of heaven and regain their lost rights. Birsa also spent some time in the company of prominent Vaishnav preacher. Birsa started a movement and it aimed at reforming tribal society. He urged the Mundas to give up drinking liquor, clean their village, and stop believing in witchcraft and sorcery. In 1895, Birsa urged his followers to recover their glorious past. He talked of a golden age in the past, a Satyug, the age of truth, when Mundas lived a good life, constructed embankments, tapped natural springs, planted trees and orchards, practices cultivation to earn their living. The political aim of the Birsa movement was to drive out missionaries, moneylenders, Hindu landlords, and the government and set up a Munda Raj with Birsa at its head. The movement was widespread, so the British officials decided to act. Birsa started touring the villages to gain support using traditional symbols and language to rouse people, urging them to destroy Ravana, who was Ravana, Dikus and the Europeans, and establish a kingdom under his leadership. In 1900, Birsa died of cholera and the movement faded out. But the movement was significant in at least two ways. First, it forced the colonial government to introduce laws so that the land of the tribals could not be easily taken over by Dikus. Second, it showed once again that the tribal people had the capacity to protest against injustice and express their anger against colonial rule. Hope you understand that who were the tribal groups, what they did do, and who were the Dikus, and what was the golden age. Thank you.